In a 1995 article in the New Republic, philosopher and psychoanalyst Jonathan Lear defended Freudian psychoanalysis against the recent wave of neoconservative and neopositivistic aggression. Lear characterized the psychoanalytic attitude as one of profound humility in the face of the infinite complexity of another human being. This ethical stance is at the core of the common ground shared by psychoanalysis and historical analysis. Like the psychoanalyst, the historian works with surfeits of meaning, more specifically, the historian who explicitly brings psychoanalytic interpretation to bear on the life of an individual or a group works with surfeits of unconscious and repressed meaning. Critics argue that the penetration of the unconscious demeans personhood, and the psychoanalytic paradigm has a crucial place in the history of the subject, continuing the post-Enlightenment dislodging of the alleged rationality and transparency of the Cartesian cogito, while insisting on the integrity of a complicated and coherent personhood. For Freud, that quality of personhood or subjectivity involves the capacity and the will to historicize and work through those psychic pressures which otherwise induce neurotic symptoms. To take on the mantle of psychoanalysis means to respect the subjectivity of one's subjects, objects of analysis, which is a two-way obligation. The respect of the analyst, the therapist, or the historian must also be merited. Notwithstanding the absence of the therapeutic in historical analysis, the application of psychoanalysis to subjects without the sense of personhood, that is the basis for psychoanalytic understanding, makes no sense. We can always label and understand symptoms without engaging in the psychoanalytic dialogue, for which an ethical mutuality is the foundation. Peter Loewenberg, a modern European historian and political psychologist at the University of California, Los Angeles, has been combining psychoanalytic and historical research for a long time. His book is a collection of essays in 3 parts, including sketches of developments in psychoanalytic practice and theory that can inform the historical uses of psychoanalysis, observations on Freud's religious and psychosocial identity, psychobiographical vignettes of William Gladstone, Walter Rathenau, Karl Renn, and Vladimir Zhirinovsky, and general statements on anxiety, racism, and nationalism. However, the book's initial discussion of terms and method introduces a disturbing vagueness. Loewenberg draws from 4 areas of innovation to the classic Freudian psychoanalytic discourse, but does not work them through coherently. In other words, the analyst and the historian can and should recognize their own complicated subjectivities and symptomaticities with regard to their patients and their material, but this recognition should serve precisely to avoid violence to analysts and historical material. Loewenberg's musings on Freud's identity contribute to the ongoing territorial wars about my Freud versus your Freud. Freud can survive these gestures of appropriation, just as Tamino survives the appropriative advances of the 3 ladies in the first act of The Magic Flute. However, figures more fragile, Freud, are far less certain to survive the indulgences of contemporary scholarship. Walter Rathenau, the Weimar Republic's Jewish foreign minister, is not at all certain that his intricacy and vulnerability will continue to survive the facile accusation of Jewish self-hatred that is leveled continually, if rarely in so cursory a fashion as here. Loewenberg accepts the judgment, and by failing to allow Rathenau to speak, he duplicates the Nazi position of silencing the self-hater. He asserts that Rathenau's refusal of protection was an extension of his self-loathing and the desire to be martyred. There is no evidence for this interpretation, and there is no evidence to undermine the more common view that Rathenau declined personal security out of an insistence on living at least at a minimal level of dignity. The politically, ethically, and historically reckless treatment of Walter Rathenau has broad political and ethical ramifications, as well as historical ones. The hasty revictimization of Rathenau is incomprehensibly countermanded by the withholding of judgment in the essays on Karl Renner and Vladimir Zhirinovsky. Renner's so-called politics of accommodation, through which he made separate Austrian peaces with Austro-fascism, the Nazi annexation of the Sudetenland, and later with Stalin, is described as manipulative agreeableness. In the case of Zhirinovsky, psychobiographical reductionism becomes comical, as both Zhirinovsky and Bill Clinton were born in 1946 and both lost their fathers in automobile accidents. The study's inadequacy is due to its fragmentary nature and the absence of an articulated ethics of psychoanalytic engagement. The treatment of Rathenau, Renner, and Zhirinovsky raises a moral judgment issue in historical writing. Clinical therapists may withhold such judgment as long as it does not condone or incite violence. However, this complete suspension results in the unintentional duplication of immoral positions, such as Loewenberg's explicit antipathy to Rathenau and his implied sympathy for Renner and Zhirinovsky. Intersubjectivity, including between analyst and analysand and historian and historical subject, requires an ethics to function. Freud's therapeutic ethics are defined by the need to listen to and respect another's pain. If civility vanishes, the analysis can be called off. The analyst's respect for a patient's subjectivity presupposes the analyst's civility, which begins with a certain degree of respect for their own subjectivity, self-awareness, and self-responsibility. This necessity may be a cause of the cultural decline of psychoanalysis, as it asks for a zero degree of subjectivity from its interlocutors that contemporary culture may make more difficult. Historians who accord a subject of analysis, sympathetic and respectful interpretive language as psychoanalysis, have an obligation to establish the zero degree of subjectivity required for work to begin, and not to overestimate or underestimate subjectivity. Anti-Freudian fashion is quick to accuse Freud of dishonoring human subjectivity and responsibility. So advocates must take rigorous care not to do exactly that, while claiming to write in his name,